All right, welcome to this episode of the Aligned Founder podcast on how to give effective feedback and not avoid conflicts anymore. I'm here with Rene. How you doing?
Doing good. Until not so long time ago, I definitely never gave feedback because I wanted to avoid conflict at all cost. And there's a lot of freedom behind actually saying what you want to say. So
Spoiler alert, yeah. Nice.
Spoiler alert, yeah.
So we're going to break down today what's behind this, like on a surface level and then a deeper level, behind this pattern of like conflict avoidance. And we're going to give you the secret technique, number one proven method, how to communicate what you feel and what you need and get what you want from people without hurting them or making them angry. It's pretty good. We should probably bottle that up and sell it instead of giving it on a free podcast. But yeah, we'll do it for now and see how the reaction goes. So question for you, Rene, why do people in a business context at least struggle to give feedback, do you think?
I think it's all in the core. It doesn't matter if it's business or private, but it's based on fears. Certain fears of not being liked by the investor, being let go of the CEO position if they don't perform, being looked at as a bad person. Maybe it doesn't even have to do with business. Maybe it's on a human level how they don't want to be perceived, and it's just things they have learned to be safe or better to avoid, and that can branch out into all areas of life. And of course, we work a lot with entrepreneurs now, so we hear a lot of how that plays out in the business context, and especially I think you in the coaching part of our work. So maybe you can elaborate here a bit more.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think it's important for us to like state our credibility in the sense that we were definitely both people who avoided conflict in the past and giving effective feedback. I was probably more the kind of person to feel a lot of frustration and anger and just smile nicely and just bottle it all up inside.
And I wasn't aware, actually. I was pushing even the frustration and anger away, and I was just living with distractions and just never look at any of it and not being aware at all of what I'm doing and my behavior.
Yeah. But what I found then was like, even though I would avoid directly talking to someone about what the issue was, I would talk to other people about them and basically go around bitching and kind of like going like, oh, you'll never believe what they did. And never even giving the other person a chance to do something different or correct it, just assuming that they should know how to show up or behave in a certain context based on my own expectations, or maybe what I would see as society's expectations. Like, oh, they should be on time, for instance. You know, if someone's not on time, then I was always taught then they're very disrespectful. So then I noticed that my, business partner or whatever is turning up late. And without ever saying it to him, I just kind of grit, and I'm sitting there as he's late and just getting more and more frustrated. And then we book a meeting, and in the back of my head thinking, this fucker's going to be late again. And, he doesn't care, and he doesn't respect me. And all the time it's like brewing and brewing, but I never say it. And then I talk to other people and I say, yeah, he came late again. I can't believe it. He's so disrespectful. I can't believe I work with him. Like you know what I mean? And it's just this building topic, but it's never spoken to. And I never actually share that because I'm just so scared on a deeper level of avoiding that potentially be like whatever that worst case scenario could be that I don't even want to think about. I just don't even want to go there.
Yeah. So in a nutshell, not speaking up for yourself can, on the one hand, create immense resentment within yourself and frustration, almost like hating myself for not saying what I want to say and putting myself through this. And on the other hand, it also creates much bigger challenges in the relationships with other people, because rather than communicating something when it's fresh and not that bad, you let it bottle up until an explosion, and then probably communicate it or do things in a way that are much more destructive and then can hurt the relationship long-term way more than if it would just have been communicated right away. And also what I experienced is, to my surprise, most people react really positive about honesty, like if I'm honest, because then they can trust me more. Many even say, oh, thank you, I wasn't aware of that. And then there's still going to be those people who, no matter how well you communicate, no matter how right you may be, they're just not able to take any feedback, and they will shoot back. But then I would urge you to ask the question if you want to be around a person like this.
Totally.
So.
Totally, absolutely. So where does this come from? most of this stuff, as I said, is happening on a core level because we can do all the, top-down executive coaching or organizational behavior stuff about how to give feedback, how to, create like healthy conflict and to be able to trust each other in the workplace or, also in a personal setting as well. Like it could be the case that maybe, in a business context, you got no problem telling your employees what to do, but then you go home and with your partner, it's a whole other story and you're bottling everything up, And it just depends because how we've learned to maybe be more in tune with our, we'll say, masculine or business or doing side might be different from how our relationship to, let's say, the feminine or more like the feeling, emotional love part, And maybe we learned that like, telling people what to do when it's a, work situation is totally fine because that's what I always did with my parents or when I was growing up. But then it wasn't safe to ever show my emotions or talk about them. So that's the part that gets bottled up, I think it's important to also look at what's the risk in a business context of never diving into the core issues of this, of never being able to give proper feedback or avoiding of conflict in that situation.
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is actually the topic of burnout, because stress is not only working a lot of hours, it's actually the stress of the nervous system. And by constantly acting and behaving, communicating in a way that is not aligned for you, that creates, as I said, frustration and the train of thought that never stops. Because if you can't communicate it, it's going to communicate inside of you.
Yeah.
And that's so many clients that are laying in bed in the evening and just the brain is like going 100 miles an hour and they can't sleep. They don't get proper sleep and they never get the nervous system to actually calm down. And yeah, that, I don't know, like long term, that can be burnout, can be physical health that starts to show in negative ways.
Yeah. I think on like a best case scenario of holding back feedback and avoiding conflict, there's like there's the inefficiencies that can occur. So you maybe end up doing more, taking on more and holding more emotion or anxiety because you don't want to put that, inverted commas, on others. It's also not giving other people the chance to grow. So maybe if you never want to give direct, clear feedback to your employees, then they never get the chance to become what you would like them to be and to grow into a great person or a great worker. And then maybe you end up at some point having to fire them or get someone else to fire them because you want to avoid that as well. But, there's, you never give them the chance or trust them to be able to become that thing that you want from them. But then on the worst case scenario of never giving that feedback is how like there can be a loss of trust and respect and morale in a workplace because no one's being real. It's all this kind of like nice, like glossing over problems, but that creates all this back end politics then where everyone's talking about each other and doing things to kind of get what they need and want in a backwards way, manipulation. Exactly. Yeah. Saying the right thing at the right time to the right person instead of everyone being able to put their stuff on the table and say this is what's happening and knowing that there's trust that we can hold each other in that. And so in that case, like in some ways on a worst case scenario, it's where in this case, an entrepreneur or founder could be making their desire to be liked or not seen as a bad person above the success of their business without realizing. Because by them not giving that feedback and risking the potential of creating some kind of negative emotion or conflict, it's a short-term avoidance of a potential, and then creating a potential longer-term problem. It's chipping away over time. One example I want to give to this is like, because these are patterns we learn as a child. We just learn early on, like we have to be nice, we have to be a good person, can't be bad, can't say bad things to people or you make them feel bad. Or maybe I also learned, can't make people angry. If I say something bad, then they'll get angry at me and I won't be able to deal with that. So I'll just avoid it, okay? Something that our co-founder Bjorn talks about a lot. He said in his boardroom, even though he was the CEO, if someone got really aggravated, then he would just give them what they wanted. He would just fold because deep down on a nervous system level, he didn't feel comfortable or safe to be around someone who was angry. So that then allowed him to, make decisions that were not maybe aligned for the business because his younger self almost wasn't comfortable and had to cave to just give this person what they wanted. And I think it's almost like in that case, like the option of giving feedback or saying what I really want is not on the menu. It's kind of like, because we're using the example of like a child, it's kind of like I go to a restaurant and they hand me the children's menu, and all I can eat off is the children's menu and all I can get is I don't know, chips and chicken nuggets, okay, whatever. And then I'm looking at all the people around me and they're having beautiful, fancy, lovely salmon pasta dinners and desserts. And all I can have is this one small menu, but I never feel comfortable enough to ask for the actual thing that I need, like the menu, to be able to choose all these other options that life could have for me, because I'm so stuck on this one limited set of things that I've been given, you know? So yeah.
I I don't know why that came up now. I actually have a very, I think, funny example of how far I went with my people pleasing and not communicating things, that it's ridiculous. So my friend Vitaly from Ukraine, he had this girlfriend. She had a very strong character, and yeah, anyways, she's vegan, very strict, and kind of convinced him to also, this is the right thing to do. It's not good for animals, like you're a bad person if you eat animals, da, 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 da. All of this. And I'm not here to discuss whether it's good or bad to be vegan, doesn't matter. But anyway, I was with them, and then we were in Thailand, and at this time, I decided, you know what, I'm going to try this vegan thing as well for myself. And I was with them, traveling a bit, we were vegan, da, 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 and from this moment on, they thought I'm vegan. Right? And that was like 5 years ago now. So, but I figured like after 6 months, this is actually not for me. You know, I don't feel great. I don't want to do this anymore. And actually until this day, he doesn't know that I'm not vegan anymore. And it went as far as when I was eating with my girlfriend somewhere, she wanted to put out an Insta story and there was meat on it. I said to hide the story from them so that he doesn't see that I'm actually eating meat. And she's like, why don't you tell him? He's like, oh, then it's going to be so much discussion and so on. And now I'm just realizing it just never came up anymore. But what it did, it created stress for me. Oh, will they find out? Oh, can I post this? Did they see something? And it's like, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Like, just, and so, hey, Vitaly, if you see this, I'm eating meat again. So yeah, and that's just like one example. I'm sure there would be many of that. Was just my pattern of behavior that, oh no, they can't see me as a bad person. So
yeah.
I'd rather go through all these lengths of hiding it.
Yeah, this intricate avoidance plan.
Yeah,
it's a great one. I love that. So I think, you know, when we're looking at what's happening on a core level there, I don't think there's actually anything to do with the present day situation there. You're not actually, I'd say, if you were like fully here in the present, you're not scared of some friend or their girlfriend's response. Maybe they send you an Instagram message or maybe even call you and shout at you. All of those things you'd be totally fine with. Even if they turned up on your doorstep and were shouting at you in person, you'd probably also survive that. So there's no actual threat to your livelihood, but yet you're reacting like there is. So there has to be something on a core level working there.
Yeah.
You know? So what I'd look at is, you know, when earlier in life, when we have these behaviors like set, okay, maybe it's typically from our parents and our environment, we learn that certain expressions or emotions aren't welcome. So maybe if it's, you know, you're scared of making someone angry by giving them feedback, there can be a fear of you feeling powerless or hurt because of a time in the past that you felt powerless or hurt. And it's basically the fear of bringing up an old wound, which would be too much for your system to bear. So like, let's just completely box up and avoid that anger altogether and do nothing that there's even a 1% chance of there being anger. Another one is, you know, if you're afraid someone's going to get sad or cry or get really upset when you give them feedback, it could be you having guilt stored in your body from a past experience of feeling bad. I'm a bad person. I did something wrong. And then if you were to be someone who was to make someone else, inverted commas, feel bad, then it would activate your guilt, which is very difficult or maybe overwhelming for your system to deal with. It's not something that's happening now, but it's just triggering an old response in your body that you don't want to look at, that you're attributing to, like, okay, telling, you know, Sharon at the office that she's not pulling her weight, you know, but it's actually re-earthing something that happened when you were 7 years old, you know, when you stole a toy without realizing it and you really upset someone, you know what I mean? And you were shamed for that. You know, these are the kind of things that we're dealing with that are stored much deeper in the body, that if we haven't processed on a core level, they're actually the things driving our behavior or lack of behavior today.
Yeah.
So one thing that an exercise that I've kind of done a little bit there, but I like to help people realize how ridiculous this is, I like to go what's called to the bottom of the pit. So I take this irrational fear that they have and I walk them through all the logical next steps. You know, so maybe we can take that example with your friend.
Yeah.
So let's just say that this, you said energetic or challenging character, a girlfriend of your friend, found out that you had eaten meat or you posted a photo on your Instagram. So what's the worst thing that could happen there, do you think?
She would have sent me a long message. I would have had a conversation with the two of them. They would have challenged me on it. Yeah.
Would you have like lost the friendship maybe? Worst case scenario?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have lost the friendship.
Okay. So they probably would have challenged you on your beliefs.
Yeah.
Would have been uncomfortable.
That's it. It would have been uncomfortable. And I avoided in the past everything that was uncomfortable, physically and mentally.
Yeah. It's kind of like, you know, the not pulling off of the Band-Aid for fear of like it hurting.
Yeah.
But then over time it gets worse and worse.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really good exercise. If there's something that you're avoiding in your life, let's say like, you know, there's some feedback that you should give, cognitively go to the bottom of like, what's the worst case scenario? And explore that and realize that there is actually nothing bad that can happen, which is the signal that it is something irrational deeper that gets to be worked on. And so I think instead of, once you've rationally understood that it doesn't make sense, I think going into the feeling, what do I fear could happen? You know, and then what? And then what's underneath that? And I think that's how we can get to know ourselves on a deeper level of like what's really pulling the strings and driving our subconscious behavior in our life.
And I would even go further than that. Like, if we do a lot of work on ourselves, like now, it's interesting that you just said that, like consciously going there. This is a very ridiculous example about this eating meat or not.
Yeah.
But even now, like if I have an impulse to think about, for example, what if my mom would die? Which is a very bad thing to happen. I'm very close with my mom.
Yeah.
In the past, I would have completely not allowed myself to think about it. Now, I'm actively, no matter what it is, I'm taking a moment and I'm going there and I imagine what it would feel like, what would happen, how my life would look like, and I might feel intense sadness for a few moments. And I allow that sadness to be there. But also now I have the strength to know that I'm going to be okay.
Yeah.
No matter what happens. So I'm always already completing this worst thing that could happen to me and feel into it and feel the pain, yes, but also knowing it's going to be okay. And there's a lot of freedom behind that to explore the darkest things, even my own death.
Yeah.
And then say, fuck, not the best. But, you know, it's part of life. All of it is. And just having this awareness now, it's just, I don't know, it lets you move way more free.
Totally. Because we're not been driven by these fears that we're scared to look at.
Yeah.
So we've already kind of explored there, like what could be underneath and what are some of the potential downsides or hidden costs of not looking at these, like whether it's avoidance of anger or wanting everyone to like me or thinking I'll be a bad person if I tell them what I feel. You know, at the end of the day, we need to trust that, you know, in a way we're empowering other people. If we really tell them what we think and we're kind of doing it from an energy of like not blaming them, saying you're bad, you know, but saying, hey, I trust that you have the capacity, that's maybe not right now, but you will have the capacity to hold this and receive this. And if you don't, then that's totally fine, but this is what the truth is, you know, and at least they can thank you for being honest.
Yeah.
Even if it's hard for them to hear because it's activating some of their old wounds. But like you said, most of the time, it's not the worst case scenario. People are actually like, oh, fuck, okay, that's great, you know? Mm-hmm. So that all said, you know, I really want to give people a technique that I love to use of how we can, even if you don't have the time to come and do coaching and breathwork with Really Aligned, you know, which really is what's working on these core deeper levels about completing these fears of anger, fear of being a bad person, like really working on them so that you can be bulletproof and have that freedom. I want to give people like a tried and tested technique that they can use in their communication so they can feel more confident to approach really any situation without fear of making someone angry or making them feel bad or seeing you as a bad person. And there's this technique called nonviolent communication, which is kind of like a staple. And there's a book as well, Nonviolent Communication, Gewaltfreie Kommunikation, I think in German.
Gewaltfreie Kommunikation.
There you go, yeah, by Marshall Rosenberg. So that's a really good starting point, I think. And we also have episode 7 on, it's called Am I a People Pleaser, which we explore more of these like deeper topics in if you've enjoyed this so far. But I really want to give one technique. So first of all, I'll explain the structure of the technique and then we'll practice it so people can hear how it sounds. So the first basically thing is we want to speak from our experience when we're approaching any situation. So we don't want to say, you disrespected me because you came late, you know? So let's take the situation with Rene. Like typically, as I said before, I'm the one who usually comes late out of the two of us, but let's just say for this example, Rene is coming 30 minutes late every Tuesday for our 9 o'clock meeting. So the way to not do it would be to bottle it up for 6 weeks and then suddenly just shout, you disrespect me because you're late all the time, you know?
And already feeling angry for 6 weeks for not saying it.
So it's like a volcano exploding, totally.
Yeah.
So out of nowhere, Rene he's like, great, Pete's chill, it's fine, you know, and then all of a sudden he receives like the onslaught. So the thing to do would be to notice when there's a charge or some feeling in my system and to have the tools to communicate that right away, but doing it from my experience. So what the structure is, I notice, which is just the information about the situation. So I notice that every Tuesday when we have our 9 o'clock meeting, that you come at 9:30. So it's just purely the information, okay? The next thing is I feel. So I feel X or Y. And X or Y is not a state, which would be like I feel disrespected. It's not a feeling. Feeling is an emotion. So I feel sad, I feel angry, I feel frustrated, I feel happy, I feel guilty, I feel disappointed, you know? Whatever it is, but it has to be an emotion that is applicable to me. Saying I feel disrespected is implying still some blame. You are disrespecting me, which he could argue with. No, I'm not disrespecting you. And then we go down that rabbit hole. So I feel sad and I feel frustrated, okay? Number 3, my story is. So this is where I create a hypothesis or story about the situation and then ask him about it. So my story is that you're coming late because you don't value our time together, or you don't respect my time, or you don't respect our meetings, or you make other things more important, any of them. Number 4, is that true? So I notice on the information, I feel X emotion. My story is, and you give the story that you're telling yourself in your head, and then you ask him, is it true? Yeah. So we're no longer naming reality. We're not saying, you're disrespecting me because you come late and you don't care. We're saying, I notice you're coming 30 minutes late. I feel sad and disappointed. My story is that you don't respect our time. Is that true? And then you can respond however you like.
Yeah. Yeah, it just takes the charge out. Because I can't argue with the fact that you stated. I can't argue with how you feel. Mm-hmm. That's your feeling.
How I feel, yeah.
Yeah. And then with the third point, you say it's my story. You don't say it's a fact. Yeah. And give the person the chance to respond. So there's so much less space for attack here.
Yeah.
And it just makes the communication way softer.
Yeah. And you know, maybe you grew up in a household where coming 30 minutes late is actually very respectful, because you give the person time and space to relax and maybe read a book. And every time you meet your parents, they actually are happy when you come 30 minutes late. So that's what you always learned, and you were rewarded for that behavior, which might seem crazy to me because I was told I was punished if I came late, you know? But that's how we can have different upbringings in life situations. And if I apply my view of the world, which is very unique to me, onto you and judge you from it, then we're going to have a hard time. Whereas this method actually brings more curiosity, because then you say, no, I wasn't disrespecting you at all. Actually, maybe it's actually really respectful in my culture to do that. Or actually, I've been having a really challenging time, and you know, I've got this really bad disease that I didn't tell you about, and it's actually an opening where my assumptions are actually met with the truth. Now, outside of whatever the reason is, there's a part 2 for me, which is basically what I need, because even though he may have a very valid reason for coming at 9:30, that doesn't change the fact that if we say 9, I would like to meet at 9. So I say, thanks very much for sharing your truth. That's awesome. Okay, so what my need is that when we say we're going to meet, that we stay on time to that. Okay, it's really important to me, because for me, that's a sign of respect, and that's a basic need for me. Okay, so my ask is, or my request is, that when we say we meet at 9, that we meet on the dot at 9, and if you're going to be more than 5 minutes late, you send me a message to let me know. Mm-hmm. Is that something you can do? And then they can say yes or no.
Yeah.
If they try to turn around and say, yeah, but you're overreacting, and yeah, then they're not willing to meet your basic need, and then maybe it's someone you don't want to meet at 9 o'clock anymore. Okay,
Yes.
but most people will be rational and say, yeah, that's fair enough, and then they have a clear contract that they've opted into instead of your silent expectations that you're placing on them.
Yeah.
So yeah, the part 2, as I said, it's find what your need is underlying your request, and then make your request, and you almost make a little contract. And that means that you have some trust in future that they're going to want to meet you there. And I think most humans, when we give them that opportunity and we don't attack them or make them wrong, and we invite them in, then they're willing to meet us there, and they want to meet us there.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really powerful tool that you can use to not make people angry or sad or whatever, feeling bad.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And most people are not aware of the tool because we're just used to say whatever.
That's why we should turn it into a multi-million-dollar funnel. No, but and just to apply it to a different context, let's say you've got an employee who the work they submit is not really at the standard you need, and you're finding it hard to communicate. Like an example of that was, so I noticed I asked you for 10 briefings and you're delivering 7 to 8, and the quality that I would need is of a A+ standard, and I'm receiving A-. I feel a little frustrated because I really need these to have a top standard. My story is that you're not putting enough time and energy into these. Is that true? And they may say, no, I'm working really hard. It's really my top priority. Oh, okay. Well, my need is that, we have these 10 briefings and they're at A+ standard. Is that something you're available to do within the next week? Can we get them to that level? And if they commit and say, yes, I can do it, and then they don't deliver again, then there's a follow-up. Just like if you come late again, 9:30 the next week, then I need to set some kind of boundary of hey, I noticed you didn't do it. Yeah. Let's talk about what that means, and maybe we stop meeting at 9 o'clock. Yeah. So I think also having your own boundaries and your kind of next escalation steps if the person doesn't follow through with what they've consciously opted in for.
Yeah, and there's a smaller percentage of people who come to us, I think, but there's also the flip side of people who say, I don't have problems communicating, I always communicate everything I want, but then they often are way too harsh, and they communicate in a way that is violent, basically, just saying, I want this, and then it's actually the people who work for them, maybe, who don't like the workplace or feel not heard, and then this person might have trouble keeping the good employees. Yeah. So that's also also for people who say, oh, I'm not a people pleaser at all, I always communicate my needs. For them to learn that way of communicating can be very good for the people in their environment, or their wife or husband, or
it's basically softening the blows that maybe they don't even realize they're throwing. Yeah.
Yes.
And if you're someone who communicates very directly in that way, then there's a chance you might be attracting more people who are more likely to not speak up and state their needs because it's been easier to do. Yeah. So you taking the lead and starting to try to communicate in that way, you may find surprisingly that it creates even more connection and positive feelings towards you that you didn't know was possible because you just knew the one way, which is being very direct all the time.
For sure.
So, yeah, so that's a really nice topic. As always with this stuff, as I said, episode number 7 is an interesting deep dive. And there's this mix of learning the communication tools, like what we mentioned, as well as taking the time to look and breathe through, of course, the deeper fears that might be underlying your conflict avoidance and avoidance of giving feedback. So there we go.
Here we go.
Another successful episode in the tank.
Yeah.
And we'll see you in the next one.